Good evening, and welcome to the 7th annual Nellie Bly Award for Investigative Reporting. Yay is right. We've made it to 7 years old. Who would have thought? I'm Bruce Roeder, president and founder of the Museum of Political Corruption and its Center for Ethical Governance. I'm delighted you could join us here this evening as we celebrate Anna Wolfe as this year's winner of the Nellie Bly Award. Let me say first that I'm thrilled that we are back again live in our community, yes, presenting the Nellie Bly Award for the first time live since COVID. And here's some more good news. You know that the Museum of Political Corruption has been around now for about 10 years, and I'm pleased to relate to you that corruption in Albany seems to have been solved. Yes. That is solved. That is, if we are to believe a recent article in the Buffalo News. And who wouldn't believe what is written in the press, right? Yes. It suggests that corruption has all but disappeared in Albany. The August 27th article, entitled "Albany, Why It's Hardly Corrupt at All Anymore," observes that there has been a noticeable decline in scandals over these past several years. Yes, good news indeed, and of course I immediately responded to the paper's editors by taking full credit for it. So now that corruption has been solved here, I'll be speaking to Anna later about opening up a branch of our museum down in Mississippi. Nellie Bly was a young reporter at the beginning of her career when she came up to Albany to report on statewide corruption. Bly had heard that one could bribe the New York State legislature to pass or kill any bill. So, posing as a lobbyist, she put this to the test. In fact, she was able to have a bill killed for the bargain basement sum of $1,250. Perhaps the New York legislature costs a little bit more these days. Since Nellie Bly was asked to pay $1,250 for our legislature, that is the amount that we have fixed for the honorarium that we give. We have a wonderful program in store for you this evening, a fitting tribute to Anna Wolfe, to the profession of investigative journalism, and of course to Nellie Bly, the fearless 19th century reporter for whom our award is named. Highlighting and celebrating inspirational, empowering individuals like Nellie Bly and Anna Wolfe is one way we seek to fulfill our mission to educate and empower the public. We've also hosted an ethics symposium in conjunction with the Times-Union. Our collection of quotes on ethical leadership has gained the participation of distinguished leaders such as Zephyr Teachout, Preet Bharara, and former President Jimmy Carter. We created a historic walking tour of downtown Albany. And we launched our Disrupt film series, which tackles a broad array of pressing social issues. And in fact, in honor of Anna's work, our Disrupt film series is currently screening the powerful documentary Take It From Me, which offers an intimate look at how welfare reform affects the lives of 4 women struggling against great odds to raise themselves and their families out of poverty in New York City in the early 2000s. You can view this documentary right now, along with the panel discussion that we put together. Information on how to do this and how to register for it is at our table right over there. And if I can add just one more PSA, from the inserts in your programs, you can see that we are now accepting nominations for the museum's Hall of Shame and Hall of Honor. Yes. We plan to make the announcement on December 9th, which is International Anti-Corruption Day. There are pencils and a ballot box at our table, and of course my advice is vote early and vote often. So, naturally, we can't do all that we do alone. We thrive on your ideas and your enthusiasm. So, of course, your donations and your support are always greatly appreciated, whether under the table or over the table, large bills or small, unmarked ones. Your support helps us in our mission to serve the public. And now I'd like to share this video tribute to Anna.
Tonight, it is with great pleasure that we present the 7th Annual Nellie Bly Award for Investigative Reporting to Anna Wolfe. Anna Wolfe has been an investigative reporter for Mississippi Today since 2018, where she has reported on poverty, inequality, and corruption. Her Back Channel series has chronicled corruption within Mississippi's welfare program. Where officials diverted millions of dollars in federal funds away from the state's most vulnerable and into unrelated pet projects or into the hands of friends and family members. Born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, Anna Wolfe moved to Mississippi in 2012, where she attended Mississippi State University. Wolfe's tenacious reporting has earned her numerous awards, including the Pulitzer Prize for State Government Accountability, 2 Goldsmith Prizes for Investigative Reporting, the John J. Harry Frank Guggenheim Excellence in Criminal Justice Reporting Award, and the National Press Foundation's Poverty and Inequality Award. In 2023, Wolfe also received a Pulitzer Prize for her distinguished coverage of issues of local or statewide concern. By reporting on corruption and inequality, by exposing injustice, Anna Wolfe has pursued justice. She has informed and empowered her community and has made her community better. Tonight, we come together to honor Anna Wolfe.
Congratulations, Anna. You're the most talented young investigative reporter that I know. I can't believe you're only 28. You've already won a Pulitzer, 2 Goldsmith, a Livingston, and now Nellie Bly Award, of course, many others. And if there's anyone who reminds me of Nellie Bly, it's you. And I think she was only like 23 when she wrote her famous series, 10 Days in a Madhouse, and which of course exposed all this horrible conditions inside these mental institutions in New York and led to massive reforms. And then a year later, pretended to be a lobbyist and went into the New York legislature and, of course, exposed that whole corrupt system of basically bribes being paid to lawmakers to either pass bills or kill bills. And anyway, just amazing work. And your work is no less amazing. And I just want to personally thank you for what you've done. You've taken on a beat that a lot of people probably wouldn't have, just really focusing on the most vulnerable people who rarely have a voice, and at least one that's heard. And you've just showed how basically $78 million is just taken out of their pockets, money that should have helped them and didn't. And now, of course, it's huge national news, as it should be. And so I just want to thank you so much, Anna, for what you have done, not just for Mississippi, but for the nation, really just focusing our attention on what's really important. May God bless you, Anna. Thanks so much.
And together we say, thank you.
Yeah. A wonderful tribute, and so glad that our last year's recipient, Jerry Mitchell, could participate in this. Let me give a tremendous thank you to documentary filmmaker and museum trustee and director of our Disrupt film series, Veronica Medina Matzner, and to her assistant, Clara de Aruda, for creating our presentation video this evening. And yes, absolutely. And let me also give a tremendous thanks to all those who have supported tonight's program, including Ken Ackerman, Creighton Michael, WAMC for offering us this wonderful space for this evening's program. Yes. the Times Union, and tonight's panelists, Rex Smith, Casey Seiler, and Liz Benjamin, and especially to the League of Women Voters, who has joined us in producing this evening's program, with special thanks to Patricia Sibilia and Paula Brewer. Now, I would like to invite Deb Lehman, Director of Voter Services for the League of Women Voters of Albany County, to say a few words and to introduce our honoree.
Good evening. I'm Deborah Liebman, Director of Voter Services of the League of Women Voters of Albany County. The League of Women Voters of New Albany is honored to partner with the Museum of Political Corruption in this event honoring Anna Wolfe as the 2023 recipient of the museum's Nellie Bly Award for Investigative Journalism. The League of Women Voters works to protect, maintain, and expand voter rights. The League works to promote voting for all those who are eligible and to educate voters so that they can become informed voters. Political corruption can occur at any level of government, leading to a disillusioned electorate and affecting voting and voter turnout. Investigative journalism is critical to the work done by the League. It promotes transparency in government and educates voters on the critical issues affecting them and hopefully motivates them to not take their right to vote for granted. Thank you, Anna Wolfe and the Museum of Political Corruption for your work in educating voters on political corruption through investigative journalism. Now I'd like to introduce our honoree, Anna Wolfe. Anna is an investigative reporter writing today about poverty and economic justice for Mississippi Today. Before joining Mississippi Today in September 2018, Anna worked for 3 years at the Clarion Ledger, Mississippi's statewide daily newspaper. She also worked as an investigative reporter for the Center for Public Integrity and the Jackson Free Press, the capital city's alternative news weekly. From the printed program that was available for you, you can see that Anna has won more awards than we can name this evening. But Anna, a hearty congratulations on winning the Nellie Bly Award and of course this year's Pulitzer Prize for local reporting. And now, Anna, we'd like to invite you up to accept the Nellie Bly Trophy and offer some remarks.
For you. Take it out of its wrapping.
Amazing, thank you.
Oops. This is for you.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Absolutely.
Okay, okay. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you to the League. I'm very honored to accept this award. I guess I just want to say that I recognize that a lot of you guys probably first came to the story that I worked on knowing it as like the Brett Favre welfare scandal. And I hope maybe our conversation tonight, and if you've looked at any of the stories that I've written, I hope will come away with a kind of a deeper understanding of how much of a bigger and more insidious story this is for the people of Mississippi, but also the people of this country, and everyone affected by entrenched poverty, which is every one of us. I think people in my state in particular take solace in really just seeing their experiences reflected on the page. People in Mississippi know how corrupt their government is, but they don't always get to see the data, see the facts in, real hard, objective storytelling. And some of this is, is so hard to pin down, but I think that, we can accomplish that through this real dedicated reporting, specifically on topics like poverty that I feel like are often overlooked. So I just want to thank you guys for caring about the story and being here tonight. Thank you. Should I stay up there?
No, you're okay. Great. Well, thank you, Anna. And at this time, we will transition to our panel discussion. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce the moderator for this evening's panel, Rex Smith. Frankly, Rex hardly needs introduction. We hear his voice of calm and reason weekly on the nationally syndicated media project produced right here by Northeast Public Radio. Nowadays, we also get to enjoy Rex's insights on a broad array of topics in the Upstate American, an online journal he founded. Yes, let's hear it for the Upstate American. Rex has served as a Pulitzer Prize juror, and with tremendous thanks, he has also served on this year's Nellie Bly Award Selection Committee. And I'm delighted to hand the mic over to Rex now.
All right. Let me ask my three panelists to join us up here. Anna, that would be you right there in the far left seat, and Casey Seiler and Liz Benjamin. I'll just say a couple of words as they're coming up, because we're going to be talking about journalism up here. I like to define journalism as the process of giving people a true view of that which lies beyond their own line of sight. And that can include everything, from an account of a city council meeting to a concert review, or an in-depth look at a political candidate's position on the issues, or some heart-rending images from Hamas. All of that is journalism, if it is truth-telling. But investigative journalism, which is what Anna does, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight, is a little bit different from that broad definition, qualitatively and often quantitatively. In the 5 W's in H, who, what, when, where, why, and how, investigative journalism tends to focus on the last two, why and how. And it pulls back the curtain, really, on something that hasn't yet been a story, or it answers a question, deeper questions after readers have gotten to know a story, perhaps. Investigative reporting, often called watchdog reporting or accountability journalism, it holds powerful people and institutions to account. It's what we call enterprise reporting. That is, it is motivated by a journalist or a newsroom deciding to pursue a story rather than reacting to something that has happened. You can tell the quality of a news organization by the quantity of its enterprise reporting, by whether it really engages in accountability journalism or just kind of lets news wash over it and then parrot it back to people. I've been engaged personally with investigative reporting for decades. I did big and little investigations as a reporter in a big newsroom, and I led investigations in small and mid-sized newsrooms. And I've been a juror for the Pulitzers, as we mentioned, in investigative reporting, and I was one of the judges for this wonderful award tonight. I'm very proud of that. I have to tell you, we announced the award, the Nellie Bly Award for Anna, and 2 weeks later, this other outfit, Columbia University, announced that she'd won this other prize. You've heard of it, maybe, the Pulitzer. We were so proud. We thought, she's ours. Isn't that great? And in this last role, let me tell you that Anna Wolfe measures up alongside some of the finest investigative reporters of our time. Her relentless work to uncover details of the biggest public financial scandal in Mississippi state government history was tough and brave, and knowing investigative reporting, I'm sure it must have been exhausting. So we're going to ask Anna a little bit about it and get some further insights of two people who also know a lot about investigative reporting, namely Liz Benjamin, who did strong investigative work as a reporter for the Times-Union and the New York Daily News before turning her career toward a nightly TV news show and then to her current work in public affairs, and Casey Seiler, the editor of the Times-Union, who took up investigative work when he led the Times-Union's investigative bureau and now oversees what I would assert is certainly the strongest newsroom in upstate New York, with its great tradition of investigative reporting dating back many decades. So let us talk a little bit about this, and a little bit about what Bruce said is the main topic that we are supposed to address here, which is namely, what is the media doing to protect democracy? And we'll talk a little bit about the Brett Favre welfare scandal and so on. I'm going to just move to the other microphone if anybody's controlling these things. Because you know how Mike's going to have. Okay. How are we? So if it was the Brett Favre welfare scandal, and you said that it's broader than that, and that it touches all of us, in what way should we be affected by this? How is it broader? But doesn't the celebrity of somebody actually mean that people are going to pay attention to it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think once we realized that Brett Favre was involved in some way in this scandal, we knew immediately that it would get more attention and it would get more eyes on it. And, if that meant that more people were going to come to read a story about systemic and generational poverty in Mississippi, then I'm all for it, right? This is the topic that I kind of came to Mississippi Today in 2018 to cover. Poverty affects all of us. It affects our communities. It affects when we go out into the world and we are engaging with, infrastructure and, public utilities. I mean, I live in Jackson, Mississippi, and 2 years ago, I was without water for 9 days at my house as a result of poverty in Jackson. It's really kind of a laundry list of ways that, you can see that impact your own household, even if you don't consider yourself, without means.
But, systemic and generational poverty, Casey, is not in itself a topic that's going to draw immediate attention, amazingly enough, right? What is going to draw readers to a story is going to be a bit more of a powerful scandal. Think about the stories that really motivate people to pay attention. And if people aren't paying attention, journalism doesn't really succeed, right?
Yeah, if people don't understand what the impact is on the lives of people who they can relate to, and the challenge is not in trying to get people to care about Brett Favre doing something wrong, but in rather making the people who are truly impacted by corruption, by poor policy decisions, and explaining how it has put a kink into their lives, that it has made their lives worse. And in attempting to draw the people who suffer from corruption as three-dimensional characters, you are giving voice to their humanity. You are telling your readers, whatever point on the socioeconomic spectrum they come from, what the stakes are. And that's why it's so remarkable that keeping an eye on the victim throughout the entire welfare scandal was so remarkable, was so bold, because it could have turned into a story about rich jackasses at the trough of public funds. And what Anna and Mississippi Today did that was so remarkable was always and correct me if I'm wrong, if you think there was ever a loop in the story where you sort of got to Brett Favre, but you were always working to bring the story back to the people who were being impacted by the people who were losing out because somebody was getting hundreds of millions of dollars in funding.
One of the hard things, I think, in reporting a beat, which really your beat is poverty, one of the hard things is keeping people who are your sources talking to you. And I think of Liz often about this because Liz had a reputation of being a bit of a pushy reporter. Yay. It's why she kept getting promoted. But it's not easy to keep people talking to you, right? And now you're, as I was for a few years, you're often the other side of the notebook. People are calling you to ask you questions. Reporters are, I mean. What do you think about that? What is how do you do great journalism if the task at hand is also to keep the great sources talking to you?
Well, first, what's so impressive about what you've done in particular is, and not to put too fine a point on it, but your age, because people, and I'm considerably older, but I get what's disappointing frequently about the reporters who call me today is their lack of institutional knowledge and their lack of effort to get institutionally knowledgeable, which is really disappointing, because to report on something as complex and convoluted as poverty and government funding, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, et cetera, you need like a dictionary. And you need people, and there are many people who I would call functionaries, for lack of a better term, who are in middle management of government, who do see the corruption, who do have many years of experience, who are willing to speak to you if you finally give them a voice. So it's not merely the voiceless victims, but the voiceless people in the middle or towards the bottom who are pushing the paper, for lack of a better word, who actually know where the bodies are buried and really want to say something about it. So to find those people and to keep them talking and to provide them protection, which is crucial, and then go in armed to the people who really have a responsibility to have their feet held to the fire. I mean, we used to say, comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable is the responsibility that we had as reporters, and too few young reporters, I feel, unfortunately, don't feel that anymore, in part because, you're not getting rich in this business. The glory, this is a really unusual and well-deserved opportunity and example of somebody who really put their nose to the grindstone and worked incredibly hard, but it's an anomaly, unfortunately, and the resources that are necessary and the opportunity that Mississippi Today provides by giving you the beat. When you said, I'd like to report on poverty, and they said, sure, right, which most outlets would not, sadly. So all of that, I think, is really so like a unicorn of a situation here where all of these aspects come together. And getting people to talk to you. Elected officials love talking. They talk all the time. They talk to you about themselves and how great they are and how great the things that they're doing are, that they perceive that they're doing are. But once you present them with facts and force them to respond to the things that are perhaps not so fantastic that they're up to, that's when things get really dicey. So first you build the foundation, and then you go to them and say, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this? If you have those facts cold, they really have no place to go. But it's the people in the middle and who know things need your knowledge and your protection and your willingness to listen to them, which so few people are, and reporters don't have time, unfortunately, often to do.
Time. Is time an issue for you? How long did you spend on this project? It was 3 years or something?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I started looking into this issue in 2017. The stories that we're talking about published in 2022. Yeah, the institutional knowledge, I mean, that's what I spent most of the time doing. So it's kind of hard to say I was reporting on a story when really I was just trying to get my bearings on these big, complex, convoluted programs. But I guess I've calculated, if you have 2,000 working hours in a year, I mean, 10,000 hours on this story overall, probably.
Isn't that the Malcolm Gladwell?
Yeah,
That's right.
$10,000. 10,000 hours makes you an expert.
Yeah,
That's correct. That is
So
correct.
there you go.
But it's so unusual to have a person say, I am laser focused on poverty, which really is unfortunately an issue that many people not only want to overlook, but are afraid to look at because they themselves are a few steps away from it, or it's too uncomfortable for them, or it's something that is not me. So to make them care is not merely the star power of Brett Favre, although people under a certain age probably have no idea who the hell he is either, but also the sad fact is that so many people expect corruption of their public officials, particularly in New York or Mississippi, which are sort of, infamous for it. Or Chicago, or Louisiana,
or Florida, or
California,
South Carolina,
all of these
or,
places,
yeah.
right? And you need to make people care also about where it's hitting them in their pocket. These were public dollars. This is tax dollars. This is disgusting, right? Where it was supposed to go help people or people really don't love the idea of their tax dollars going to help to begin with, and then adding on to that the extra injustice of the fact that it didn't even go to those people, it went to somebody else entirely. That's a really tough thing to get people to care about.
The governor, the former governor, is still talking to you, right?
We had an interview. We had one interview. It was quite a long interview, but that was before the story ran.
Was his lawyer sitting with him?
He did not have a lawyer representing him sitting with him.
Man needs a crisis communication specialist.
That's one more interview than I've gotten with a former governor. So.
I bet he would talk to you now.
No.
Probably not. Not on the record. And I wouldn't talk to him off.
Well,
And
right.
not Casey. Yeah, I don't think he talked to Casey. But I once had to sit for an hour at a parking lot outside a dry cleaner as the former governor complained to me about Casey Seiler. I just want to point out.
Really? You never told me that story, really?
That's okay, he tried to get me fired.
Yeah.
He created a dossier about me.
Yeah. So
Generally snarky was the phrase. I'll never forget that because it sounded like a Civil War general. Like, generally snarky was known for.
But what's really amazing about journalism, and so sad to me, and this is why this is so an encouraging moment, because I just see, I'm obviously not in business anymore, but I just see it as just crumbling away in so many levels, and lack of funds, and lack of education, and lack of stick-to-itiveness, and all sorts of things. And that, and people, it used to be a badge of honor when the governor would be like, I'm not talking to you. Like, like, I did it, right? So who the hell cares that you won't talk to me? I'm gonna talk to somebody else. You're gonna have a press conference, I'm gonna sit in the room. You can't ban me, although he's done that too, or try to. But the number of people who see that as a positive thing is dwindling. And the number of newsrooms that see that as a positive thing is dwindling, which is really concerning. I don't know, I can say this, right? I don't know that my former employer who stuck by me, not Rex, by the way, he was several former employers ago, but who stuck by me when the governor came and demanded that I be fired because he didn't like the way I was reporting, and also said, and I will not allow any of your people to talk to any of my agency heads, and thank God, my boss said, screw you. I don't know that that would happen in this day and age at this particular leadership of this particular outlet, which will remain unnamed. So, it's a different regime.
So Anna, your editor gave you time to do this.
But stood by you. I imagine there were threats. There must have been threats.
Yeah, and I mean, when you talk about like the sourcing issue and the people in kind of middle management who know where the bodies are, and the climate in Mississippi is such that those people are not going to talk to the media. I mean, they're the people who are just the step, away from being in poverty themselves. They're not going to risk losing their state job. Then there are people who are impacted by the systems and touching the systems themselves, and they know that they're corrupt. They know better than anyone else that they're corrupt. They're getting denied welfare. 99% of people who were applying for cash welfare assistance in 2017 were denied the assistance in the poorest state in the country. That's how I got onto the story in the first place. Those people know, and they're talking and they're screaming about it, but they don't have the data. They don't have the access or the resources to disseminate that information. They don't have the information in the first place, and no one's listening to them as a result of that. And I think that that's like one of the biggest lessons of this story of all, is that we need to listen to these people because they know better than we do.
So then, if your goal is to make a difference, which is probably why we went into journalism, and by the way, people don't believe that. They think that we're in it for something else, but honest to God, people, that's why we're here. If your goal is to make a difference and the people who need power are being ignored, how do you actually deliver it to them? Isn't direct political action more effective than journalism then?
Direct political action can change a lot, direct political action usually results in getting an individual into office who you believe will then be able to change something, and frequently then becomes part of the system. Unfortunately, but direct political action, in so much as you're giving money is given in a manner that influences an election, or people show up. I mean, I have never seen activists more dedicated, except for now I'm dating myself. The ACT UP AIDS folks in the 80s were amazing, right? They locked themselves to things. They did mock die-ins. They hung banners, etc. No one touched them until the disability activists came along. And those folks made people feel so uncomfortable, because they would come in their wheelchairs with their ventilators and they would lie down on the ground, and the sergeant at arms didn't know what the hell to do with them, right? Or they would block the doors in a hearing room for 8 hours and refuse to allow anyone to leave until they got their SSI, their modest, ridiculously low SSI increase or what have you. That kind of stuff changes things, but that requires incredible organization, which if poverty is a full-time job, you don't have time to be organized and show up and spend 8 hours, like hanging around and knocking on doors and screaming in people's faces, etc. The other people who are incredibly effective is AARP, and they do it because of numbers, right? They show up in their flotilla of red-shirted individuals who just like flood the Capitol. But it's very rare to see that kind of thing succeed.
I would add to that, in New York, the Sexual Harassment Working Group, I think that they, perhaps in large part because so many of them are former legislative aides themselves, they know how to work the gears and levers. This is an organization that sprung up, I think, in the wake of Me Too, or maybe
Jeff
just
Klein.
before, right?
It was Jeff Klein.
So it was a little bit before Me Too.
It was on the front end.
Yeah, right. And pushed for greater transparency, greater responsiveness on sexual harassment within the kind of political ecosystem of Albany, and of course in the larger sense in
Yeah, but
politics
just to
in
be
general.
clear, let's remember also, it was just this year that the legislative staff organized to try and unionize themselves,
yeah,
because
right.
the dirty little secret of the legislature is that if you're a legislative staffer, you've shit benefits. For a legislature that is driven largely by progressives who stand up and fight for families and fight for the impoverished and say that all these people deserve all of these benefits, and their very own staff are working hundreds of hours and not getting benefits. That's sick.
But we were talking before this got underway about the difficulty of carrying out some of this reporting in the absence of enough person power to make it happen. So many newsrooms have been decimated.
Yeah.
The digital revolution has cost half of the journalists in America their jobs. I mean, the Times Union newsroom that I walked into in 1995 had about 150 people, and I think it's, probably about half that now.
It's about half that, and we are in good shape, relatively speaking, to
This is the
many
healthiest
outlets.
newsroom.
But I have to ask the question, 10,000 hours, you filed during that time, right?
Yeah, I was filing stories, but there was time that I was not filing so much. And I think this is a note about journalism right now. Like we're talking a lot about the medium that we're speaking through. Mm-hmm. And I'm just talking about reporting. I'm talking about finding information. And I think we focus a lot on the medium and not a lot on how you get the information that is conveyed. So I'm writing these stories. I'm a kind of a print journalist, right? But my work is being used to create creative, videos and things that people are actually seeing who might not know about Mississippi Today or be able to come to us to read. And that's a win for me. It's the information that I feel ownership about.
Digital presentation is so superior to print in almost every respect.
Well, so I
mean, we're talking about investigative journalism here. We're talking about finding information and basically making the news. Whatever medium, I think it should go out in all mediums. I think about this family that I interviewed and wrote a story about in December. This mother had a really complicated case with her TANF, and that's welfare, and her child support case. and the way that these programs were interacting with each other, and she basically lost $5,000 that she was entitled to receive right before Christmas last year. And it was this really complicated story based on these policies that Mississippi has that just punishes single mothers and mothers on welfare. There's a policy, for example, that Mississippi's not the only state where if you are on welfare when you have another child, that child is not entitled to welfare. Additionally, if you receive child support for a child who is on welfare, that money is taken by the state. You don't get it, and it's taken to pay back the TANF that the state provided to you.
Yeah.
So how do you convey these really complicated things that are affecting people's lives, but to the average person? Well, you do it through compelling storytelling of these families. And I just remember like calling, it was the child's, who had this money taken, their father, and I called him, and he was like, I kind of was just asking him how he felt about this, and he's like, this is just what Mississippi does. This is, they don't want to help the people that need help, but what do? They help Brett Favre. They help Phil Bryant. And I was like, he didn't know he didn't know probably that Mississippi Today reported that story, or that I was the reporter who worked on that story. It was the way that he used the information to convey this point that he already knew. He already knew that this corruption was affecting how he was able to live his life in the conditions that he was living in. But it gave him that information to be able to convey that, which is empowering. And I think empowerment is,
I mean, did you ever deal with anybody? I'm sorry, I'm asking a question.
No.
But
This is the vagary of having one former. Like, this is not going to work.
Like
you should never do this again.
Everybody talks over everybody else.
did you encounter anybody for whom their feeling of helplessness made you despair?
I mean, of course.
Was that a regular thing?
Of course.
And what about the feeling of working on a long, long story? I mean, I once spent 11 months on a single story, and in about the middle of it, I was going crazy. I wanted to be in print. You must have had some of those feelings, and some of the feelings of, am I ever going to get this done? Or am I ever going to be able to really know what the end is, what the publication, how do you know when you're done?
She's never going to be done.
Yeah.
It's a lifelong thing, right? It's like a quest. But also until there is no poverty's eradicated, until Mississippi fixes its screwed up problems, until someone goes to jail, until what? There's always going to be the next story, which is what drives a reporter, always a good reporter. And I don't think there's ever a done. In this instance, what I think is the question is like, when did you know, like, I'm ready to go with, there's more here, but I'm ready to go with this now.
Yeah.
You see how Liz edited my question very effectively?
Well, I've just known Rex a long time. I'm just interpreting Rex.
I mean, you guys know how this goes. Like, you do have to put something out there at a certain point in order to get people talking, and then,
And jar loose the rest of it.
Right.
Yep.
And I think, my editor played a big role in that because, if it were up to me, like, I'd probably just try to get every answer to every single question before ever writing anything, because I'm a very careful reporter, and I want every single answer before I try to, tell a story. And I think, my editor was very intentional about saying, like, if you have this evidence about involvement from the former governor, who was the state's top official at the time, who his office was directly over the welfare office that perpetuated this scandal, like, that is the person that we need to know about right now. We need to know what his involvement is. And as soon as you have information about that, like, we need to publish it. And there were other people too that I trusted that at the time who were saying, like, maybe I had kind of, things had dried up and I hadn't written in a while, and they're like, you just need to be writing, every day. It's the Watergate template, right?
Drip.
And
Get it out.
It's true. It's not my style. It's not what I would prefer. I want to, like, tell the whole story at once.
Yeah.
Now, just explain that a bit. You need to be writing every day so that it gets out to the public, and more is then
Because one begins
elicited.
the next,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, it reminds me a little of, this will only mean something to the three people on this dais, but it's sort of the Jim Michaels approach of. But he would, you would do. This is the endless frustration of being a reporter instead of maybe like a novel. Like if you would put out a book, like a true, true reporting.
Like a civil action.
Yeah.
Which the reporting of which took like 8 years.
And you
have you read that? Oh, it's
so it's like so the city editor who I'm speaking of right now was like, and what do you have now? Like, that's nice. I'm like, I broke the story. It's amazing. Look at all these people. There's bodies on the ground. It's great. And he's like, and what's the follow? Right? And you're like, what do you mean, what's the follow? Like, what are you talking about?
This. What do you got today?
Right. So what do we do? You'd come in and you'd see it in print. It'd be on the front page and all the TVs would be picking it up because that's what happens. You're speaking of like, and I do agree, once you get something in print, all the TVs stand in front of the Capitol and they rip and read. They read your story on the air, right? And then there's a press conference and they go to that and they cover that. And
W whatever has confirmed that.
Right, exactly. Can confirm. So, and then, and you're reveling in this moment and you walk into the office and the boss is like, great, what's next? And you're like, what's next? But that's what daily reporting is. Even investigative reporting, which was like a gift to have all this time to grow something and to fertilize it. I
think the biggest challenge where that's concerned, and I want to hear what you guys have experienced this, like knowing what details matter, and you're so far, down this trail that like, when you say when your editor says what's next, and you've found some kind of interesting things, but they don't make up a story. They would kind of just actually probably just confuse the general public if you just put it out there like that. What do you do with all these and these
Yeah, well, that's when
Flotsam. Like our literary
these
flotsam.
threads that don't make up anything.
If I may tell a brief anecdote. So we all worked with Harry Rosenfeld, who was Woodward and Bernstein's managing editor at the Washington Post during Watergate, and hired Bob Woodward to the Washington Post and became the editor of the Times Union 2 editors before Rex?
Yeah, there's one in between Harry and me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
He was still there when I was there, but he's emeritus, I think.
Yeah. And Harry passed away two and a half years ago. Mm-hmm. And the last time I saw him was at his apartment, and it was just about a month before the former governor resigned. And I remember Harry, who at that point was very weak. You could still have a conversation with him, but I remember him, and he was using oxygen, and he was criticizing a story that we had just written about Cuomo as being too technical and hard to understand. And it's exactly what you're talking about. And I was like, I know, you're right. It was because it was kind of on sort of the minutia of one aspect of the scandal, and I can't remember what it was, but it was complex. And Harry, even this was probably 2 weeks before he passed away, and he still had that kind of eye for this story isn't going to connect with readers like it ought to. And that's exactly what you're talking about, that you're so deep into it.
There's two things. First, there's some grace in being a state capitol paper, I think, because your job is to be a little bit more grainy in terms of the minutia of the way that the cogs spin in government, I would argue, or in a Mississippi Today, or in a place that, your niche is a little bit grainier. Sure. I would have pushed back on Harry, but that's what I do anyway.
So you did differently when you were at the Times Union than when you were at the Daily News? The
Daily News, like at the very end of the primary that Rudy Giuliani was in, they sent me to Florida to chase around after him. And he didn't have any money for a campaign bus. I was a political reporter in State House, largely. So I had to rent a car, and I'm a terrible driver, and I'm lost in Florida all the time. And I got like 3 speeding tickets in Tallahassee trying to find the State House. Anyway, running around after him, and I would like report all day. He would do like 10 events, and I think he spent like $1 million per like electoral vote, and he got like 0, whatever. He did very badly, and the New York City firefighters were there protesting and following it around. And I would do all this reporting, and I would call the editor, and they'd be like, oh my God, great stuff, 200 words. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, 200 words? Like I can burp 200 words. Like I just did. Like my God, okay. And I would like bang it out in my car and send it via my cell phone. You know, like that was what my life was, working for a tab. And I did get on the Wood a couple of times, the front page. And it was like glorious. Like still in New York City, I mean, again, dating myself, in New York City when they had news kiosks still, and you would walk down the street and there's your freaking byline, like in bazooplicate on, you know, on the front page of the Daily News. That's like amazing, right? It's an amazing feeling. And people are reading it and they're on the subway and like you're just sitting there like, that's not, you know, whatever. It's great. It's really great. But to your point, like, murder your darlings. Like, you gotta murder your darlings, which if I learned anything at Columbia, it was only that. It was from Jonathan, who taught me that. He was the feature reporter at Newsday, and then subsequently he taught features, and I will remember his last name as soon as I leave this room.
Okay.
But anyway, he was brilliant, and he was like, this is great, but you're in love with your own shit. Like, you gotta stop being in love with your writing and kill what doesn't serve. Like, if it's not iron filings all lined up towards the point and you can't let the voices run the story, you're telling a story and you have to make it so. That doesn't mean you put yourself in the story or your opinion in the story, but you have to drive the story forward. And if it doesn't serve the story, you must let go of it. And that's hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's the more technical the story is, you didn't understand it. It's if you don't understand the story, it's going to come off as more technical. If you really understand it, then you can say it in a million ways that a million people are going to understand. But to write a very technical, complicated story like that, you have to have confidence and you have to take liberties in order to do that.
Yes,
I think
you do.
That's the challenge.
Did you read?
Think that it couldn't be possible for your story to have been run by a tabloid, for example, because the depth that you needed to go to. It would have
been all Brett Favre all the time.
It would have been all Brett Favre, right? I mean, I do think that therefore you're really lucky to work for Mississippi Today. And people probably don't understand the evolution of the ecosystem of not-for-profit news and the growth of these newsrooms, of which Mississippi Today is perhaps arguably the best example in the country of these fine rising regional or statewide newsrooms. I don't know, maybe Center for Investigative Reporting in California. There are a number of them that are really good. But the fact that you are given the time and because it's digital, you have the space, then the only challenge is to write well enough to keep the readers engaged, or to have the support of a great design team that can turn some of these complex things into really great graphics so they can show the flow of the dollars.
Have you read Myth of the Welfare Queen?
What's that?
Myth of the Welfare Queen.
Oh, Myth of the Welfare Queen. That was
the one
long
I read
ago, right?
was called The Queen.
Right.
So
that's the more recent one.
That's the more recent one. So
Yeah.
but what's amazing to me is that, you know, the Myth of the Welfare Queen and the general sort of concept is debunking the idea that people who are impoverished are lazy. Because it is so hard to be poor, and the job that you need to do, they're like, please fill out these 10,000 forms in triplicate, and please deliver them at this time, and if you don't deliver them at this time, we're gonna put you to the back of the line, and if your benefits run out, you can go to this place on Wednesday, and you can go to this place on Friday to get food, but this place only has milk, and this place only has diapers, and this place only, and you're spending your entire time shuttling, like, how the hell are you gonna get a job? Like, a job, that is a job. So to be able to convey that when you said TANF to me, like, just brought back all these horrible memories, like PTSD of that. It used to be called food stamps. It used to be called a lot of things. But just being able to navigate that system, like, you should give someone a PhD in poverty. That's a major, major ability. And then you're like, and why aren't you looking for a job? Why aren't I looking for a job? Like, I have a full-time job. This is my job.
No, it's so hard to ask the questions that you know your readers are going to ask, and that you have to do that. You have to interrogate people to, because you know your reader's going to, and so you kind of have to go that far.
Well, your reader's going to be like, well, I don't understand why you had 8 kids by, 6 other, right? Isn't it your fault, right? The blaming of an individual for a cycle of systemic, all sorts of systemic things that put them into a place where they are and unable to get out, where people don't feel and feel like they have all of these options and all these opportunities, and why are they squandering them, and why
Do you
can't
think
they
we practice journalism differently because of that kind of response from readers? Because we are writing with the recognition that people are going to attack us for being softies and liberals and advocating for people who really ought to help themselves? Are we changing what the nature of truth-telling because of the attacks that have become rampant on journalists as being the enemy?
We don't have enough time. There is no truth, right? I mean, this is like we can have a whole fight about objectivity. Like, if you and I were in the same place at the same time and watched the same event, we would still write different stories because we would pick different quotes, because my life experience is different from your life experience, and what you saw and what you heard is seen through your own personal filter, and blah, blah, blah. So like the idea of like an absolute truth, I mean, numbers, I guess, but it's like lies, damn lies, and statistics, so maybe not. I don't think that objectivity is, I think it's a false construct. And then we get lulled into this belly button gazing, like, oh, are we to this and are we to that? I mean, look, the New York Post right now is on a major, and as a Jew, I feel like I can say this, on a tear, a pro-Israel tear, a major tear. Does the New York Post consider themselves soft? No.
No, I wouldn't. I'm not talking about objectivity. I mean, I certainly agree there's no such thing as objectivity, nor do we want to be objective.
In other words, are you saying, does too much coverage of poverty or a lot of coverage of poverty include sort of a kind of gestural finger wag at some point to say, we know these people have made bad choices, but still it's unfortunate what's happening to
Or do we shy from it because we are subject to the pressure?
Shy from what?
Shy from coverage. Do we back away from some of the coverage of the sort that Anna is doing? Is there not enough of that in the mainstream media because of the fear of being labeled?
It doesn't sell papers, that's why it's not there.
I think if we shy from that coverage, it's because I think many, and I hope the Times Union covers issues of poverty, and we've taken some big swings at that, including writing about redlining and food deserts in Albany. I think we could definitely do more of it. We've tried to cover crime differently, and especially over the course of the last 3.5 years. But I think that there are outlets that shy away from covering the lives of people who deal with economic insecurity, people who end up kind of caught up in the criminal justice system, and for whatever reason just keep tumbling down that staircase because it doesn't generate online audience. I don't know, but I've always believed that compelling stories are going to be compelling to readers if they are well told.
But
if
Anna,
they're told shabbily and constructed poorly, they won't.
How do you do that? When you go to talk to folks, you need to convey to them, I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you. I'm doing this because I think what's happening to you is wrong, right? Or, I mean, how do you approach that with individuals who are, I mean, even I'm loath to use the word victimized, but they are victimized, obviously. They are getting the short end of this corruption stick.
Yeah, I think I just go into it saying that you have a story that's worthy of being told. And I think that the difficulty or the reason that people might shy away from it is just because it's really freaking hard. To cover poverty and to write about stories about people who are experiencing poverty, you really do have to examine a person's entire life to do it effectively. and it takes a lot of time and it's really hard, and not everyone wants to go through that. And you do it with compassion and you do it with empathy, and you do it without flinching and without making excuses for anybody. I don't think people want us to make excuses for them. I think we do that.
Right.
We think that people want for us to make excuses for them, and I don't think that's true. I think you just do it by, I think that they have dignity and they know that their stories are worth being told, and so it's not that hard to convince them of that.
But they also know that they're poor. Like, it's not, like, so not shying away from what the reality is. Like, you don't, all these words that we use as euphemisms, disadvantaged, and like all the, right, like, they know what's what. Like, I think just dealing with people on a level of, on a level of reality probably is the best way forward.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to get more of the audience involved. We agreed that we were going to have the last 15 minutes for conversation with the audience, but I think we should open it a little bit sooner than that, because there are some really interesting points that are going on here. And I was thinking, we might be just talking about what we're doing. You get a bunch of journalists in the room and they start entertaining themselves with old stories. But I don't know which Jonathan we're talking about. Anyway, this is
crazy.
So let's, I'd love to hear, do we have a microphone? Do you have, or do you want to send this out?
Under the stage.
I bet I could.
There is one under the stage, he pointed it out.
Or you could just come up and we'll
just
give you
yell
one of
out.
ours.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
just yell.
Yeah,
It's not a
that's
big
right.
room.
Who has a comment or a thought here? We can see you. Yeah, right here. Yep.
What does the 24-hour news cycle do to this whole conversation?
Yeah, what does the 24-hour news cycle do to
Does
it?
it play down the deep journalism that Anna's been doing, or is it just, what's the next hot stories for this one?
Oh, geez. I mean, the 24-hour news cycle is relentless, and it means when something big breaks, you get up 3 or 4 paragraphs about it right away with an italicized line at the end that says, this is a breaking story, it will be updated. So when we get word that Alan Hevesy, the former controller, passes away, as he did last Thursday, we put up 3 or 4 paragraphs, and then Rick Carlin does his best to kind of build it out with the context of consequential, idealistic, tragic life, which is probably appropriate to mention considering this fine institution that we're here for tonight. And it also means that last Wednesday's paper didn't have any election results in it because our print deadline was 9:30, and that meant that we were able to spend the hours after the print version had gone to bed and was getting rolled out on the press, just thinking about the web coverage of the vote totals in goodness knows how many counties. And I've got to tell you, as Rex can attest, the idea of not having to gear your entire election night towards making an 11:30 or maybe a midnight deadline if you're lucky, made things a lot easier. And when I woke up on that Wednesday, I only had to deal with, 4 or 5 emails from people saying, how come you don't have anything in the paper? Because everybody knew it's online. And
They're not reading the actual paper. But
My first election,
were, but not a lot.
My first election at the Times-Union, I kept holding to try to get it right, because we had my first local election, we had a Troy mayoral race that kept going back and forth. And I was so proud. There was an executive retreat going on up at Blue Mountain Lake, and I was the last one to come because it was a Tuesday night, everybody else was there. And when I got there Wednesday morning, I was so proud of the paper I brought, and the general manager said to me, yeah, nobody's going to read your damn paper. Because it was so late coming off the press that the copies of the paper were still sitting in the driveways as you drove along in Loudonville by 4 o'clock in the afternoon. People hadn't picked it up in the morning. So that is not something you have to worry about anymore because you get the news as it happens. That's a great thing. But the question is, does it diminish the kind of reporting that Anna is doing? Does it push people to Does it push newsrooms to try to give us lighter, quicker stuff that will keep the content flowing, keep the eyeballs coming all around the clock? I suggest it probably does some of that. I would suggest that it's probably harder to allocate time for great reporting. And if you look at, again, most of the newsrooms in the state, the Times-Union is an exceptional newspaper still. And everywhere else in the state, we were just talking as this evening began about the fact that the Poughkeepsie Journal, a newsroom that used to have 50 people, maybe 60 actually in the late 90s, now has a single reporter covering Poughkeepsie. Where is it that you said there are no reporters? There's not a reporter covering the brand of, anyway, you said Clarion Ledger now, and Jackson has 3? Yeah. Again, this is another...
But I don't think the question about 24-hour news, I feel like it's not so much about how it's changed the dissemination of news, but how people receive it and how people are ingesting information and the kind of volatile way that people have to talk in order for people to care or feel like they're being informed. And that, I feel like, is the bigger conversation.
Do you pay attention to, and this relates to your question, do you pay attention to engagement time and scroll depth on your stories?
No.
Okay.
Do your
I
reporters?
came from the Clarion Ledger where that was mandatory,
Paying
and
attention
I
to
don't
that
have
kind of
to do that anymore, and I'm very lucky for that. And I think that that's because, again, the job that I'm doing is finding out stuff, and that information is getting out through people reading it on Mississippi Today, but also because we partner with other publications who can print, any publication can print anything we write for free in their print publications. So, and people are using the information to make videos or to do news segments on TV, and like, you know, that's what that's fine. I'm getting paid basically to find the information. Like writing is a job too. It's a lot of work too. But I still feel like the reporting is what the value that I'm bringing.
Yeah. When people would come into my office as job applicants and say, why do you want to be a reporter? And they say, well, I've always dreamed of being a writer, and I love to write. And I say, you should go be a writer then.
I was a very crappy writer. My writing is utilitarian. I was never a good writer.
We wouldn't hire writers.
And honestly, we've got some great writers. Paul Grondel is like a dream of a writer. Yancey's wife, Kate Gurnett. Incredible writer. Selena Ottaway, incredible writer. Like, all these people worked at the Times-Union, and I would read my copy and be like, oh, God, this is so not great. But, like, they didn't take down John Sweeney.
No, it's true.
So, I mean, you know, I didn't either on my own, but I'm just saying that, like, I contributed to that, and it was gratifying, but I was a digger, and I held people, and I asked hard questions and wasn't afraid to do that. That was my, like, niche, right? And I was never, like, gonna win any, like, writing awards.
We've got a question or comment over here.
Yes, I want to admit that I don't know much about Mississippi politics. And
But
so
you're gonna go read a bunch about it now.
Was there any one particular thing that was the crux, or that one particular thing that was the most difficult thing for you to crack or whatever? And how did you do that?
Well, I kind of want to answer that question by saying that, you know, all of what happened, that is generally... That is generally the sentiment. And then things just got really distorted over time. Like, what is an anti-poverty measure? As probably many of you know about welfare reform in the 90s, changing the way that we spend money so that we're not actually just providing cash assistance to people anymore, but we're getting them into jobs, and we're doing workforce development, and we're doing fatherhood and two-parent family formation, whatever that is. That was one of the things that I was trying to figure out from the beginning. Out of wedlock pregnancy prevention. These kind of,
Euphemisms?
Yeah. I mean, and they could basically just say that anything that they wanted to spend money on was one of those
Youth
things.
football development, right?
Exactly.
Or whatever, right?
That's how you get a volleyball stadium.
That's how
right?
you get a lot of things, right? You're like, I would like to create, it's good. We have an childhood obesity problem that is particularly
Right.
acute with individuals of color, of a lower socioeconomic scale. And so as a result, I'm going to invest in a statewide playground creation program. And then I'm going to give I'm going to give that money to my buddy who builds playgrounds, right? Like that, and you can see where I believe that I'm actually combating poverty by helping kids get healthy by running around outside.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was what I...
Question here, yeah.
Anna, you mentioned your job is to find the information. So how do you do that? What's your process? What's your day-to-day?
Yeah, good. What's the
So a lot of records requests. And to give an example with this story, again, like the story came out in 2017 that the state was denying 99% of people who were applying for cash welfare assistance. The Clarion Ledger wrote a story about it, and nothing else happened. Yeah. So I was like, well, hey, maybe I should go find out where all that money is going if it's not going to people in poverty. And that's literally what happened. I started filing records requests.
What do you what did you ask for?
I started filing records requests for any, expenditure reports, invoices, receipts that, reflected how this money was being spent. And I didn't really get anything. I was getting these really. I was at the Clarion Ledger at this point. I had just taken over the health beat. That's kind of what allowed me to start looking at this. And I was getting back these really wild, nonsensical reports that were basically all that the state was sending the federal government. Remember, this is federal money that the federal government's sending to Mississippi to spend on anti-poverty measures. And they're sending back these like two-page reports. To
HHS?
And
to
they're
HHS.
Like, cool. Thanks
And
very much.
it's like, work supports $9 million, literally. No receipts, no itemized expenditures. I'm serious. So those are the stories that I was writing at the beginning, right? What are these things? And, couldn't really get them to tell me, couldn't get them to give me documentation. Then realized that, it's because tens of millions of these dollars are actually being funneled through these nonprofits that are then not sending the information back to the state government. And that's where the information lies, but you can't go to them for the information because it's a private nonprofit. So that kind of using that reporting technique as a template, I've replicated that over into other areas. I'm working on a story about adult protective services right now, which privatize their adult neglect and abuse investigators to private entities across the state.
Oh boy.
So if you were accused of abusing a vulnerable adult, it was a private employee who was coming to your house to interview you.
Those are amusing characters, the private investigators. And how can you get those documents?
So, in the case of the TANF story, I was hitting a brick wall after brick wall, and I was writing about that. I was writing about how secretive they were being,
right.
That's where it comes in, where it is so important to write stories. And if I had known what I know now, I would have written more, right?
Just hammer them on the lack of
And then what?
transparency
Somebody
over and over
came
and
to you
over.
and was like, hey, by the way.
No, it was literally days after I started at Mississippi Today, I made it my mission. I was going to figure out what was going on with TANF because I'd gotten these reports and they didn't make sense, and I felt like there was something there. Of course, I was talking to people who had questions as well, like, we go by the office where they're supposed to be providing services and there's no one there getting services. And, even state lawmakers, Democratic state lawmakers who were crying out about how much money was being left unspent and how little was going to actual programming. I texted the state auditor like a few days after I started at Mississippi Today, and I said, hey, I've got this new job, I'm reporting on poverty now. I really think that DHS would be a good subject for an audit. It was a good subject for an audit, and that's what resulted in the real hard numbers actually coming out.
So they got the information.
The state auditor launched an investigation, which ended up turning into a criminal investigation, which ended up resulting in the arrest of 6 people in early 2020. Basically, what I did after that was try to figure out where else all the money went, because those indictments only outlined $4 million in misspending, and I knew that it was more than that. And then came the information about the former governor and Brett Favre, which is what really blew the story.
Where did
Is
that
the state
come
auditor independent of the governor?
Independent?
Sorry?
Is the state auditor
The state auditor is an elected official in Mississippi, but he was appointed to his post initially by former Governor Phil Bryant. He was also former Governor Phil
Sounds like
Bryant's
Denali.
campaign manager.
Right, that's the one, and is now.
But where did that information come? Where did the Favre?
So I wrote the first story that named Brett Favre because I researched the company that was named in the indictments that received $2 million in stolen welfare money, and was pretty quickly able to find out that that was a company that was promoted by and invested by Brett Favre. So I put in a records request to DHS for any emails related to Brett Favre, and that's where I came back with a calendar invite from the former director saying that the governor and Brett Favre had requested that they meet to discuss concussion research, which was the firm that received the $2 million, and the new facility at USM, which I would later realize was the volleyball stadium.
For Favre's kids.
So right. So just to be clear,
just piecing together.
Right, and over a period of, so it was like, I think there's something here, I think, it's like having a tooth and you're just like poking at it until it falls out, and then you're like, oh.
And think about how many things I was following that didn't turn into anything.
Right, a lot, yeah.
There was a question behind you also, yes, back here.
Oh, hi, I actually read with my husband with great pleasure and great sadness your first article about TANF. My husband worked in social services his entire career, and as soon as he said, you have to read this, because he knew when it was 99% did not receive it, he said there was something very, very wrong here, because he knew the level of poverty in Mississippi. And I wanted to ask you about patterns. I actually, in one portion of my life, represent people who, I have a large population of people who are poor, many minority individuals, and I'm starting to see patterns where it comes to when money floods a system, or money is available in a system, and suddenly you have bottom feeders, opportunists, and it just takes a couple people in the right positions. It's happening with the response to the opioid crisis right now. It's happening with the housing crisis right now. Right here in our community, we have, for example, in the North End, which is, has been a lower income area for some time, that's my district. All of a sudden, these big developers come in, which put in these great, beautiful luxury apartment buildings next to public housing. And then all of the other, buildings that used to take Section 8 and, all of that type of stuff are now throwing those people out. And it's like all of these things come in and they just upend the system. And when I started reading more and more, but obviously you're at a much larger level, as it was statewide, I saw the same pattern. And it was money available, just a few people that could upend a whole system and disadvantage an enormous amount of people. It's almost Shakespearean at this point.
Right. I mean, they're massive conspiracies, and they're happening almost exclusively in programs affecting low-income people, and the reason we don't know about it is because no one cares to find out about what's happening with the low-income population in this country. And I mean, that's where it's such a rich environment for investigative reporting. I just pulled this up. I didn't want you to think I was being rude, but Mississippi is not the only state that turns away almost all of its applicants for welfare. I think it was Texas that was the largest that I found in the most recent data dive that I did. Let me look at the graph here, sorry. But I think Texas was turning away 95% 5% of people applying for welfare. Let's see, here it is. Yeah, 95% of people. Michigan was around 90%. Indiana, 90%, around 90%. Yeah, I mean, this is a totally forgotten program. I went to Wisconsin a few months ago. They were interested in the story, if you guys can imagine why. Brett Favre, being from, sports and all that. No, and I spoke to people up there, and I did a little data dive just on Wisconsin's TANF data to say, like, did you guys know that there's over $100 million or whatever the amount was just sitting in a pot somewhere, and there's poverty abounding in this state, and there's money that could be used to help these people, and it's not being used for that, and kind of pulled out some other data to show like the changes
Does this
over
story
time.
have to be done state by state, or can there not be a national investigation?
Right, no, there can't, because there's no federal data. So there are national think tanks that do data dives on TANF every year in every state, but they give you, just the littlest amount, and they were doing it for Mississippi too, right? And it was just saying, like, Mississippi's spending 10% on work supports, yay. So that
Based on that
didn't
two-page report that they received
Exactly.
from the state. I will say, just to be contrarian, for fun. There is, during the pandemic, the federal government threw an enormous amount of money around, and lo and behold, by giving people subsidies, poorer people with children, child poverty actually moved in the right direction. Right?
Remarkable.
So I'm not negating any of the conversation that we're having here. I'm just saying it is possible with directed funds to individuals in a way that works, if somebody's minding the store, to actually improve people's lives for the better.
Oh, yeah.
What concerns me about this work is incredibly important, has to be done, and has to be exposed. What concerns me is that the backlash in this country, particularly when you talk about like Trumpian type folks, or the House Speaker who is also a Trumpian type person, will look at this and say, you know what this means? We should stop spending money on poverty programs because they're all a waste of time and they're not being great. That concerns me. It's no reason why we should not be doing this work. You just need to be vigilant about ensuring that the work is done in a manner that people's feet are held to the fire in the way that it doesn't go off the rails.
I totally agree. Have thought about that a lot, and I would say that based on what I've received from readers, I've been surprised about how well this story bridges the gap between people with different ideologies, people with different ideas about public assistance programs or what is the solution to poverty, because the conservatives, they don't want to see their dollars frittered away. They don't like corruption. And those of them that I've talked to are like, that money should have gone to people who needed it. They're not saying take that money away. They're saying that money should have been used. It exists specifically for that purpose. I believe in government money being used for the purposes set out for. That's what conservatives believe that too. And they say that should have been used in an effective way to solve poverty. Maybe not cash assistance, but what other ways are there that we have outcomes to show that poverty is improved through government programs?
Cash assistance does work. It does work. Like, data demonstrates that if you give people money, more often than not, they spend it on the things, even a small amount of money, that make a difference in their lives and in the lives of their children. It's the question of ensuring that the money gets to where it's supposed to go, and then trusting people when they make decisions about how best to spend it for themselves, and not saying, well, you can't buy Pampers and you can't buy formula and you can't buy this and you can't buy that.
What else out here? Any other? Yes, right here on the edge. Yep.
During your investigation, did you ever get threatened?
Threats to reporters.
Yeah.
Have you ever been threatened?
I don't think so. Not anything that I would say was a serious threat.
Casey only got threatened by the governor.
I got death threats, but I was on TV. It was a different animal entirely.
I think now there's more of it too. I think these last few months, a lot of threats to political writers and, again, political people, political journalists on television.
Yeah.
Well, when I was the editor in Troy.
Well, that's a different thing.
Yeah, Troy's kind of wild. Yeah, I think that the level of threats coming from, the radical right, which the FBI defines as the greatest threat to civil disorder in the United States, that is significant, and that's bound to only grow as the political season goes along. So that's going to be tough.
I'm not going to open this vein. I have thoughts, but I just won't.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Because I'm always thinking I'm always relating this to newsroom management. So Rex and I and Liz worked in a newsroom where people would, many people would start their careers, or maybe it was the second stop, as Mississippi Today was for you. And then they would do great work, and then they would move on. They would go on to other outlets. Liz went to the Daily News. She just hired away earlier this year one of my favorite, Pete Damola, who's a wonderful news and features reporter who covered Schenectady County.
We lost Lydia Holgreen to the New York Times. Can you imagine? Why would she go to the New York Times from the Times Union? Why would you do that?
Well, no, and so my question for you is, would you, are you happy where you are now? You're a Pulitzer Prize winner, and that means that if you wanted to, for example, cover poverty issues on a national stage, I'm sure that people have cruised you for that kind of work, to be able to perhaps not abandon, but move on from the state level focus that you've got right now. And I'm not asking you to say, oh yeah, I got an offer or something like that. But when you think about using the acclaim that you have gotten right now to move ahead in the work you do you worry about the fact that you would be severing yourself from the story and the topics that you clearly are so devoted to?
Let me answer this question.
I'm sorry, that's it.
I mean, the simplest answer is that I'm not done.
Right.
And we were just talking about this in the car, and that, I have the dream job in journalism, and no one can really tell me otherwise. So when I think about going and climbing a ladder, that doesn't really mean anything to me when I feel like I have the dream job in journalism. And I want other young people thinking about going into journalism to realize that that's a thing. When we kind of had an idea that, the Pulitzer might be a thing, my editor set up just a time for the newsroom to gather in this local restaurant in town, which is a place that I used to wait tables at, and I used to live in the building. And when he told me, I was in the airport when he told me, and he's like, we're gonna gather that day. No matter what happens, we're gonna gather that day, and we're just gonna celebrate all of the newsroom's, accomplishments. And I said, at Howlin' Mouse, I mean, that's really special to me. And he was like, I know, that's why we did it. And then when I walked in the building that day, my parents were there.
Oh man, that's so nice.
I have a really good job and a really good staff that I work with.
Anna Wolfe, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to our panelists. Thank you all.